All right, let's talk about Apple's new sleep score. You know, that one single number from 0 to 100 that's supposed to sum up your entire night? On the surface, it sounds super simple, right? But underneath, there's a whole lot going on. So in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and really crack that code.
So you wake up, you glance at your watch, and boom, a 78. Okay, what does that actually mean? Is that a B+? Did I do something right? What went wrong? It feels like you're getting a grade for your sleep, but there are no notes in the margin to tell you why. That's the real question we're tackling today. What is Apple really looking at? And more importantly, how can we use this to get genuinely better sleep, not just a higher number?
So let's start with the basics from Apple itself. Turns out the whole score boils down to just three main things, what they call the three pillars of your sleep. We're talking about sleep duration, bedtime consistency, and sleep interruptions. But the key thing to understand is that they are not all created equal, not by a long shot.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Look at this breakdown. Sleep duration, that's a whopping 50% of your total score. Think about that. Half of your grade is just based on how long you were asleep. Then you've got bedtime consistency, which is a pretty hefty 30%. And finally, bringing up the rear, is sleep interruptions at 20%. This breakdown alone tells you so much about where you should be focusing if you want to see that number go up.
Okay, so Apple tells us what they're measuring, but they're pretty tight-lipped about how they're measuring it. The exact formula is a black box, but that's never stopped the internet, has it? We've got some amazing work from folks in the community who have basically reverse-engineered the whole thing. I'm talking about people like the 5K runner, a triathlete who just dives super deep into this tech, and the quantified scientist who literally tracked and analyzed 75 nights of his own sleep to figure this out. Thanks to them, we pretty much know the rules of the game.
So let's dive into that biggest piece of the pie. Duration, that massive 50%. You'd think it's just about the total hours you slept, right? Well, not exactly. The analysts discovered it's actually a two-part deal. It's your total time asleep, yeah, but it's also your sleep quality, specifically how much time you spend in those crucial deep and REM stages. And that's a huge insight for anyone with sleep issues. It's not just about being in bed longer, it's about what happens when you're there.
So what's the magic number? How long do you need to sleep to max out this part of the score? Well, the data from the quantified scientist points to a surprisingly specific target: 7 hours and 50 minutes.
Hit that 7-hour, 50-minute mark, or go over, and you're golden. You get all the points. But the second you fall short, the penalties start. And it's not a gentle slope. The penalty actually gets steeper the less you sleep. So let's say you only get 6 hours. That's going to cost you something like 13 points right off the top. Ouch. Okay, but remember, duration is also about quality. And this is why the 5K runner's analysis really shines. He found that if your watch thinks you didn't get enough deep sleep, you get slapped with a flat penalty, a straight -5 points.
And get this penalty has nothing to do with how long you slept. You could sleep for a glorious 9 hours, but if your deep sleep was too low, bam, you lose those 5 points. And guess what? The exact same rule applies to REM sleep. If your REM is also low, that's another 5-point hit. So you could be losing a full 10 points from your score just because of poor sleep quality, even if you were in bed forever.
All right, let's move on to pillar number 2, bedtime consistency, which is worth 30 points. And the data here revealed something super practical, something you can actually use, a grace period. And that grace period is just 15 minutes. What that means is, if you've told your watch you go to bed at 11 p.m., you can actually hit the sack anytime up to 11:15 p.m., and you won't lose a single point. It's a nice little buffer. But what happens when you go past that 15-minute window?
Well, the penalties kick in, and they kick in fast. As you can see, if you're just an hour late, you've already lost 10 points. That's a third of all the points for this entire category. Gone. And if you're, say, 2.5 hours late, your consistency score completely bottoms out at 0. Fun fact, though, the penalty for going to bed early is way, way less harsh.
And that brings us to our final pillar, the interruption score, worth the last 20 points. And just like with duration, this one is also a 2-for-1 deal. Apple is looking at two things here: the total time you spent awake overnight and the total number of times you woke up. Both of these can chip away at your score.
So what's the magic number to avoid penalties here? Well, it looks like you get a bit of a free pass. The data shows you can be awake for a total of up to 11 minutes, and you can have up to 2 separate wake-ups, and you won't lose any points. But as soon as you cross one of those lines, the score starts to drop from that perfect 20.
Okay, so now we know the formula. We've cracked the code. But
This entire system, this whole score, is built on one giant assumption, that the data the watch is collecting is actually accurate. I mean, how well does a gadget on your wrist really know if you're in deep sleep versus REM sleep? That's the million-dollar question.
Well, this number might surprise you. And it comes directly from Apple's own research paper on this stuff from 2023. They compared the watch to a full-on gold standard lab sleep study, and the average agreement score they got was 0.63.
So what does that mean in plain English? It means that the watch's ability to tell which sleep stage you're in, awake, core, deep, or REM, is about 63% accurate compared to the real deal. And that's a really big deal. Remember those 10 points you can lose for not having enough deep or REM sleep? Well, if the measurement itself is only 63% accurate, then that part of your score is built on some pretty shaky ground.
You know, the 5K runner has this quote that I think just nails the whole issue with a single sleep score. He calls it useful mathematical nonsense. He says it's like adding 2 apples plus 3 pears plus 4 bananas equals 9 fruit. The final number is fruit, but you've lost all the important details. An 85 score doesn't tell you the story of your night. Was your duration great, but your consistency terrible? Or the other way around? The single number hides the why.
So, knowing all this, the formula, the inaccuracies, the useful nonsense of it all, what do we do? How do we use this knowledge to our advantage? Because if we know the rules of the game, we can make a plan. Not just to get a better score, but to actually, genuinely, get better sleep.
Okay, let's break it down into a simple 3-point action plan. Number 1, make duration your absolute priority. Shoot for that magic number of at least 7 hours and 50 minutes to lock down that massive 50% of your score. Number 2, nail down your bedtime. Treat that 15-minute window as your target. And number 3, work on your sleep hygiene. You know the drill, make your room cool, dark, and quiet to cut down on those interruptions that cost you the last 20% of your score. And look, this isn't just about gaming a score on your watch. The ideas behind Apple's score are rooted in solid science. For example, a 2017 study found that college students with irregular sleep schedules had worse grades. So that whole bedtime consistency thing, it's not just some random rule Apple made up. It has real, measurable effects on your life.
And the reason for that is something called your circadian rhythm. Think of it as your body's master clock. When you're consistent with your sleep schedule, you're keeping that clock perfectly wound. It knows when to make you sleepy and when to wake you up. But when your schedule is all over the place, you're essentially confusing the heck out of it, and you end up feeling like you're permanently jet-lagged.
So that really brings us to the final question, doesn't it? It's so easy to look at that number every morning and see it as a grade, as a test you passed or failed. But maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. Maybe it's not a grade, but a compass. Now that you know exactly what it's measuring, you can use it to point you in the right direction, to show you where you're struggling and to guide you towards what really matters: a truly healthier and more restful night's sleep.